about our book for the evening that I will be referring to as we go on. But we've chosen Booked and Busy Book Club. How about that? Let us know what you think about it. If you have any other ideas, we are still in the infancy stages and we can possibly change the name if we come up with something a little bit better. Oh, you know what? I got on my reading glasses and I got these at the dollar store for how much? $1.25. Um, they're really, I got them for computer glasses. Um, and these little $1.25 glasses really do help. But I forgot to take the tag off. So, okay, that is better. How about that? So, before we get into the second part of the book, which we started last week, I just want to again thank you all for coming to the channel. I am Angie, and every Monday we go live with a book chat about a book of interest. And last Monday we started with The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. This is part 2. And then next week we will start, we'll have a different book. So before we go any further, I ask that you like this video and that you subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to grow it. I'm just kind of winging it. In this age of technology, I have decided to kind of jump on board and do some things that I like doing. And so I hope that others will like it as well. Um, what else can I say? What else can I say? Let me see. Okay. Well, let's get into it. So the book that we chose again is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by prolific author James McBride. And this is McBride's, I guess, a current photo of him. Uh-oh. Now, this book is about life in the Chicken Hill district of Pennsylvania, starting off in 1972, but then going back to the 1920s. And let me read you a little excerpt from the Heaven and Earth bookstore. Some have called it a murder mystery locked inside a great American novel, and I would agree. I would definitely agree. Um, it's about small town secrets and the people who keep them. And so I am reading. I'll just go to what you can find on Wikipedia. So if you type in the Heaven and Earth bookstore, the Heaven and Earth grocery store, I'm sorry, on Wikipedia, this is what they have to say. It's a novel by American writer James McBride, released in 2023. The novel tells a story of Black and Jewish residents of the Chicken Hill neighborhood of Pottstown, Pennsylvania in the 20s and 30s. Now, the book opens in 1972 in the town of Pottstown, where an excavation operation for a new housing complex inadvertently discovers a skeleton in the bottom of a well. Some items are found near the body, including a mezuzah, which leads police to question the town's only Jewish resident, Malachi, who was living in a disused synagogue. And then it goes backwards, like I said, to the 20s from there. So this book is so interesting. And there were questions that I had and questions that other people with whom I've discussed the book shared with me. And so we're just going to go through some questions. And if you have any questions or any comments, please put them in the chat. Say hello and put them in the chat. So now one of the questions that I had as I read about the main location, which is Pottstown, specifically Chicken Hill neighborhood of Pottstown, that was created for Blacks and then and Jewish immigrants who were coming into that area from Europe in the 20s. As I read it, I thought about how I envisioned it based on what I read. Did I see Pottstown in my mind's eye? And I did. Of course, it says Chicken Hill, so immediately I think of something that is a hill, maybe overlooking the greater Pottstown area. Um, it's old and decrepit because, of course, it's the Black area. And it's, in the book, it talks about people walking without street lights and having to have wells because they didn't have indoor plumbing. And I thought about some areas that my family lived in the South, where the old people talked about not having indoor plumbing and had to use outhouses and that kind of thing. So I did envision it, and its description prompted memories, not necessarily of places I've lived, but places that I've visited in the past, again, the South. And even in today's time, you see a discernible difference between how people with more wealth live compared to people who are struggling, who are poor. Um, and so I did see the similarities. Now, is there a place like that for you? How did you envision this place when you read the book? And what came to mind from the places that you've lived or visited in the past? Um, Another question I wonder is there a center of life in the neighborhood for you? The way that Moshe and Shona Ludlow's grocery store was a center of activity on Chicken Hill. Everybody came to the Jewish grocery store that had been there for years because it was started by Shona's father and mother. And when they left, or when her mother died and the father left, Shona maintained the grocery store, and she and Moshe lived in the apartment above the store. But right next door, were Black people that Shona grew up with and other people um, who made up Chicken Hill. And everybody came to that store because it was the only store in the neighborhood. In order for them to do any other shopping, they had to go further into town because as time moved on, all of the other shops, the Jewish shops that were there, moved away. They closed up because these immigrants were able to amass a little bit of income. And, as they got more money, they wanted to be more white and assimilate in the white culture, and so they moved closer to the the center of town, the better areas. Now they didn't necessarily go to the best area because remember they were Jewish, and in those days there was a difference between Jewish people and other people of European descent, and so they couldn't totally assimilate, but they were enough. They were European, they weren't Black, so they could go much further than Black people could go. And so when they were able to do so, they left Chicken Hill, and as a result, the only grocery store that was still standing and still viable in the community was the one that is um, the central focus of our book, the Heaven and Earth grocery store. And it was a center of life in that neighborhood. And how many people have stores or rec centers or churches or pool halls or whatever that become the center of life in a neighborhood that is otherwise devoid of such a gathering place, whether it's in a small town or in a neighborhood in a large cosmopolitan city, where people don't venture outside of their neighborhood for various reasons. Um, so that's a question. Is there a place like that for you that is a center of life in your neighborhood? Another question that I thought about has to do with Moshe. If you um, read the book, and I'm sure many of you have, you know that Moshe's business was theater. So he had a theater where he had live entertainment, and the purpose of his theater was to bring Jewish entertainment to the area, and he did it really well. But there was competition from other places, from larger areas, even from other parts of Pennsylvania. There was just a lot of competition, and eventually he decided to desegregate and bring famous Black acts to the theater for Black audiences. Now, the question that I have is, in a time like that in the 20s, how courageous did he have to be in order to do that? So here he is, a Jewish man with a fairly decent business going, but it isn't as lucrative as it could be. And he lives in a Black area with all of these Black people. And it probably isn't anything by way of entertainment for them, except for, the juke joints, the the after hours places that were real prevalent back in the day. And so he decided to bring on some Black entertainers that were notable in that day. And people flocked from all over, from as far as New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. They came all over. And so he would have people maybe every quarter. I don't really remember in the book how often that he had these clubs, but he eventually opened more than one theater, and had one of the theaters was the theater where Black acts would come, and they would have, they would have the concerts, and they weren't like the concerts that we go to now where we sit and watch the act on stage. These types of musical extravaganzas, if you will, had the band on stage, the singer on stage, kind of like, what was it? Kind of like how Soul Train or American Bandstand did. You brought the people on stage, but then you were able to have the dance floor in front of them. So it was a dance party, and people, just really enjoyed it, and they were there all night. Um, but what kind of person did he have to be in order to bring that entertainment? Was he courageous? Was he altruistic, or was it simply a matter of capitalism and greed? He saw that there was money in it, and it didn't have anything to do with him wanting to be the nice guy bringing some form of entertainment to the masses for their benefit. It was all about him getting as much money as he could. What do you think? Now, I think that Moshe was a very good guy, but I think his wife, Shona, was the star of that family. She was the compassionate one. She was the kind one. She was the activist in the family. So, as courageous as it may have been for him to open up that venue for Black people, he was guided by the force that was called Shona, his wife. And I don't know that he would have been able to do it without her influence in his life. And of course, the fact that it was going to make him money after he realized the first time he did it that it was so popular and he made so much money, then that's when he decided to make it a regular event and truly officially open up the theater to Black people, whereas there wasn't anything else in the whole town that was available to Black people. Now, another question, thinking about what he did with his theater. Have you ever tried to change the traditions of a place or organization? And what type of courage did it take? What emotional impact did that have on your life? Um, why did you do it? Did you get to a point like Fannie Lou Hamer when you were just sick and tired of being sick and tired? Um, did you feel like you had to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves? Or was it because there was something going on that was interfering with you making a living, with the amount of money you can make, with the amount of resources that you have? Was there some benefit to you that was going to be decreased or eliminated altogether if you didn't speak up? So was it a noble cause that you stood up, for which you stood up, or was it a more practical and pragmatic reason for you speaking up? How did you feel? Was it something that you did alone? Did you stand alone? Um, and what was the result? So those are some things that I want you to ponder on, and I'd like you to add to the comments about such a time. What was it? So I can think of some times when I stood up and tried to change the traditions of an organization. Okay, so I'm in a group at church that has been doing the same thing literally for over 50 years, all of my lifetime. And I just celebrated my 63rd birthday last month. And so it was something, and it's something as simple as how often we meet, when we meet, that kind of thing. And, you know, the group in the church has grown older as I've grown older. And they used to meet once a month, and it was a big production, and there was food, and the meeting lasted 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, and it was an opportunity not only to talk about business but to socialize. And there was a lot more activity going on, and so and in a lot of instances there was something to talk about, right? But as time has gone on, and especially uh, since the lockdown with the pandemic, things just are not the same. There aren't as many people that participate, and the people that are there don't really engage as much as we have in the past because of the pandemic. We stopped serving meals. So that big production, that reason for people coming out to share a meal during the meeting is no longer there. There's not much in the way of business that we have to discuss prior to coming back into in-person meetings, which hasn't even been a year. I think they started maybe in April of 2024, and this is November. They maybe started Zoom meetings prior to that, maybe 6 months or so, maybe a year prior to that. And I think people fell off too because not everybody is tech savvy and didn't have access to Zoom, but just didn't want to use it. Because if you have a cell phone with internet, you have access to Zoom. But not everybody is tech savvy, right? So, you have people who just didn't like using Zoom. And so those people didn't participate. And now that we're back in, there are a lot of people who just don't participate for whatever reason. So my thought was, okay, let's change how we do business. We don't have to meet monthly. Why can't we meet quarterly? I recognize that there are people who come to the monthly meetings still as a fellowship, and still to socialize. But the rest of us who don't need that monthly meeting for socialization and fellowship, um, just can have better use of our time. And so there was quite a bit of discussion about it over a 3 or 4 month period. Um, and it we had to put it to a formal vote and everything. It was finally agreed upon. The motion passed, and so now we're going to meet quarterly, beginning in January. So that was something that may be a little thing, but if you know anything about dealing with traditions that are decades old, especially in the church, particularly in the Black church, then you know that it may not be as simple as it seems. So, what are your experiences of having gone against tradition and or tried to change a tradition in a place or an organization? Let us know. Okay, so another question that I have. So, what are the similarities between the characters? So, you have Shona and Moshe Ludlow, who own, who are the Jewish occupants of Chicken Hill, the last Jewish family. They don't have any children, um, and they run the bookstore, the grocery store, and the theaters on Chicken Hill. And uh, Shona's father was one of the first Jews in the area who came from Europe. She was born there, but her parents were immigrants. Her father built or led the building project for the first synagogue, which he helped name. And so they are like the Jewish part of the Jewish um, foundation of Pottstown, and everybody's always encouraging them to leave Chicken Hill. Moshe wants to leave Chicken Hill, and he wants to do something different and better. But Shona's like, no, 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 this is my home, and this is where I want to stay, because she recognizes that the neighborhood needs her as much as she needs the neighborhood. And then there are the Timlins, Nate and Addie. So Nate works at the theater with Moshe. Addie works in the store and sometimes in the house with Shona. And so there are similarities and differences between the two couples that are quite discernible. Now, the differences are easy to figure out. One couple is Jewish, and as a result, have a certain higher place in society. That is what it is. Um, they have a certain level of privilege, even though in the 20s there was a lot more racism against Jews. They definitely felt it, but not to the degree that Black people felt it. Because unless they looked a certain way, if they didn't have on the yarmulke and the other accoutrement of Judaism, especially the men, you wouldn't necessarily know they were Jewish. They just may be Eastern European, but not necessarily Jewish. And so, of course, the difference in race makes a difference. Um, that's readily discernible. And so they had a better house. They had a better way of making income. They had greater entree into um, higher society, maybe not high society, but higher society. And but the thing about the similarities, each couple was the foundation in the area. So whereas the Ludlows were the foundation in the Jewish quarter. Then the Timlins were the preeminent family as in terms of respect and stature and honor, not money, because they were not the richest in the area. You know, there were Black people who had a little bit of change, and they let you know it. So they didn't necessarily have the money, but there's always somebody that has the money that people don't like. They may pull the purse strings, but and they may get what they want, and they may have people doing their bidding because they're pulling the purse strings or because they're violent, and will use violence, will use subjugation, will use any means to keep somebody else down and oppressed. And then you have the person that doesn't have much but has everything because they have the respect of everyone. Even the person that's their nemesis, that's their enemy, they know that that person has something that they can never gain. And that's one of the reasons why they hate them and they're enemies, because they can never, no matter how much money they have, no matter how many resources they have, they can never have the respect of others the way that person that is considered to be lowlier has. So the Timlins were the family. They were the ones that people would go to when they needed advice, if they needed somebody to vouch for them. The Timlins were the people to go to. So in that respect, both couples were the go-to in the community, and they worked together. Um, they knew their place. Nate definitely knew his place as the worker bee to Moshe, but at the same time, he also knew that Moshe more than likely could not do what he did with that theater if Nate wasn't there to do what he did. And the same thing with Addie. Shona worked in the grocery store that was her grocery store, and she held court. But she would not have been able to do that if Addie had not been there to support, if Addie had not given her blessing, so to speak, quiet as it may have been. Um, they respected each other. And that is the thing. Each man respected the other, and each woman respected the other. And I think for the women, there was a true love that had they been of the same um, ethnicity and race, that they would have been closer. But society being what it is then as it is now, oftentimes forces us to remain distant enough so that we know that person, we care about that person, but we're not quite there because we're just too different. And I believe that they were as close as they could be given the circumstances of the culture. Now, when we were talking before about Moshe's motives for desegregating the local theater, were they true, or were they avaricious? There were a few people in this book that were just horrible human beings, and I'm only going to talk about one of them, Doc Roberts. He was the town doctor in Pottstown. It's a small community, small town. And in general, in those things, think Mayberry RFD. You know, there's one doctor in town. There's one real police um, officer, even though he has deputies. There may only be one or two deputies. And so there's one of everything, one dentist. There may be one barber shop, one beauty salon. And so in Pottstown, there was Doc Roberts. Now, Doc Roberts grew up in the town, and he was a mean man, and he was older, and he was racist. So this is a time in America's history when even in Pennsylvania, in many places in the country, not just the Deep South, there would be Ku Klux Klan parades. So there was no law prohibiting parades that were based in hatred and racism. So Everybody knew that at a certain time of the year, um, the Klan would be marching, in the streets with their sign, with their crosses, and in their white their white robes and hoods. Well, Doc Roberts was a member of the Klan. Now, supposedly, you don't know who they are. That's why they wear the robes and the hoods. But you know who they are. It's a small place, and everybody knew who Roberts was because he was, short and roly poly, had a certain type of gait. So when he walked, people knew it was him. And at the same time, though, this is a person that if you needed a doctor quickly, this is the only person to call. Now, you could go to another town over or even to the big city, but that cost time, effort, and money, which most Black people didn't have. And so when there uh, was a medical emergency, if they didn't have their own homegrown remedies, if there wasn't the traditional healer in the community or the midwife, um, somebody's grandmother who knew about poultices and all that kind of stuff, they would use those people first. And if they had to call on doc, they would do so grudgingly and fearfully because you didn't know what um, the outcome would be. But he was a doctor and he did some good. And Shona got sick. In the book, Shona became sick unto death and refused to be seen by Doc Roberts. At one point, she had a doctor go to a doctor in another area. She had the ladies in the community care. Addie was with her day and night, um, and they were praying for her, and they did all of these things, but she refused to be seen by Doc Roberts because of his racism, because of how he had treated her in the past, being Jewish, and because of how he treated the Black people who she considered her neighbors and her friends. And so the question then comes up um, is there good in the worst of us? Because at some point, Doc Roberts did ask, well, why won't you come see me? Let me come in and see what I can do? No, because of the kind of person he was. And so, is there good in the worst of us? And I believe there is. Should their good mitigate their worst behavior? And can it? I mean, just because you do something good, does that take away from the bad things you do? So because he was a doctor who did heal people, even Black people during his career, I'm sure he did give some attention to Black people in his career. But did that exonerate him from the racism in his heart and any racist acts and behaviors that he exhibited as a result of what he thought about Black people and Jewish people? I mean, nothing is black and white, and nothing appears as it seems. Um, so, what do you think? And how does any of this relate to what's happening today? So, this is not a political situation, but I guess I just have to think about the election. And for a lot of people, they would answer yes, the good that they think the orange one has done erases in their mind all of the bad that we know he has done and that we know he will do. And they've given him a pass and they hope that he gets better. And I just don't know how they could think that, but that's a conversation for another day, right? So I think those are all the questions that I had. Um, let's see. What else do I want to bring out about this? This is another question. What do you think is the overall message of this book? We talked about it a little bit last week, What do you really think the message is about the heaven and earth grocery store? So I believe that the injustice of being different, what it means to be handicapped or disabled, because it was called handicap back then, what it means to be disabled. But most importantly, it brings home what real community is and what real community does for its inhabitants. Now, I'm going to close this with a quote that James McBride said in an interview about his life and about the book, that you have to desire to see the good in people and to see them push past their boundaries. So that kind of speaks to that last question about, is there good in the worst of us, and does the good um, uh, exonerate them from the bad that they've done? Um, in order to see the good, you have to want to see it. You have to desire to see it. And you have to believe that they can and will push past their boundaries, push past their, the wall of hatred and the wall of racism and whatever else, and move beyond that and do something good for goodness sake, right? Um, so that really is the thing of this book. I have enjoyed reading it, and I hope that those of you who see this sometime in the future will read this book. I got my copy from Amazon, but it is available at every bookseller. Um, and I'm sure there's one near you, wherever you are. And if not, Amazon.com has them. I will